We are going to speak about the enigma of the Polish form król and Roman Jakobson's explanation of Slavic tort forms. In Common Slavic, there were a number of vowel plus liquid groups that we'll be speaking about, which are known as the tort groups, sometimes tort, sometimes tart, and it refers to a construct that consists of a low vowel plus a liquid, and it was subject to a change in Common Slavic due to the rising sonority principle, which excluded a diphthong consisting of a vowel plus a liquid, because the vowel had a higher sonority than the liquid within a syllable, and generally speaking, that was not permitted in this scheme of rising sonority. The tart group is of special interest to Slavic linguistics because we get different developments in each zone. East Slavic, West Slavic, and South Slavic each had their specific developments, though South Slavic is mostly joined with Czech and Slovak in a single zone. I'm assuming that we have Common Slavic tart with an A and an R, or AR, each one more in length, each equal to a short vowel, making a sequence equal to a long vowel or a diphthong. South Slavic, Czech, and Slovak have reflexes, which are known as trat, which derive from two more vowels, which are very obvious that we have a long A that gave us that. The East Slavic zone has two separate pleophonic vowels, which means that we get an O on either side of the R, so the East Slavic sequence is known as tort, and they each derive from a single mora vowel, giving two moras in total, but on either side of the liquid. There have been problems explaining the Polish sequence, which is known as trot, mostly because there are two basic types of evidence. On the one hand, the great Polish linguist Jan Rozwadowski in 1909 gave evidence or wrote about a sequence that we could call vprocha, which gives veproch in Polish, meaning that it was something like the East Slavic sequence originally, very likely with a vowel on either side of the liquid. However, this type of sequence, which was written about by Roman Jakobson and discussed by Jakobson in 1952 in a very famous paper about diphthongs in a liquid, this did not account for another type of data that we get in Polish, not the data given by Rozwadowski, but the data of such words as król, króla, that come also from trot groups. And the question there is why we appear to get a long O reflex in Polish, which gives us a modern U, which is written in Polish as an O with an accent mark over it, or kreska, król, króla. How could it be that on the one hand, the very same trot group gave us veproch, and gave us also something like król? Now, how did that happen is the question. A summary of the enigma facing us, the basic problem, is that we have two types of evidence. We have vprocha on the one hand and król, króla on the other. In other words, the vowel of the Polish trot sequence appears to always go back to two moras, but we're not sure if they were of the East Slavic type, being two moras on either side of the liquid, or whether they were all within a single long two mora long O vowel. Those are the two possibilities. We can take a brief look at Jakobson's 1952 treatment of Slavic diphthongs in a liquid, just to see the major points that Jakobson made in that paper. One could say that some of the major points are that in every language zone, the liquid changed from Moraic to non-Moraic. In other words, it went from a type of syllabic or vocalic liquid to a consonantal that did not have any Moraic quality anymore. And when the liquid lost its Moraic property, it had a type of compensation, which gave an additional mora to the vowel adjacent. Now, in Jakobson's theory, that could have happened either to the right or the left of the liquid. And Jakobson divided his attention into the three main groups of reflexes. And in South Slavic, we get leftward compensation as the R becomes consonantal and loses its Moraic property. And then we get a metathesis. So we wind up with tort changing to trat, and that is the situation in South Slavic. In East Slavic, we get rightward compensation right after the liquid. So tart changes to tarat, or tort changes to torot, giving us a direct route to the polnoglossia or pleophony that we know to be the East Slavic reflex. We don't get liquid metathesis in East Slavic for the simple reason that the rightward compensation produced rising sonority immediately and no further changes were necessary. In Lekhitic and Sorbian, that is including the Polish zone, we get liquid metathesis according to Jakobson's theory to start off with. That is, the Moraic R metathesizes, still remaining Moraic. So we wind up with the T, Moraic R, and then the A vowel, single mora A. And then after that only do we get the leftward compensation with the production of a type of a pleophony like East Slavic. So in other words, East Slavic and Polish, Lekhitic, according to Jakobson, both had pleophony and compensation, but East Slavic had rightward compensation and no metathesis, whereas Polish had leftward compensation only after a metathesis took place. So this is mostly a difference of relative chronology. The same sorts of changes took place, but in different orderings. One could summarize Jakobson's theory or hypothesis by stating that he followed Rozwadowski rather completely and accurately. He followed the evidence of Voporocha, but he did not really give a convincing explanation for król. In fact, Jakobson, in that very same 1952 paper, understood that very well, and he said that the forms król remain with puzzling details in relation to the treatment of these groups, and it just was not solved at that time. So it continued with no totally effective solution. In addition, one could say that there were some other problems with the Jakobsonian theory of 1952, that first of all, the fact that król behaves accentually as a long vowel sequence in paradigm B, such as król represents, or płótno, various other words of that type. But in A and C, accentual paradigms produces a short vowel, which is typical of the Polish long vowel system, not short vowel. Of course, another problem is the motivation. Why do we get totally different developments in each zone? It seems that the only reason for a different development in the South, in the West, and the East is to just produce the correct reflex. But perhaps one could actually look for a better interpretation where the developments are roughly the same, with some other differences that would explain why we get different reflexes. Just to review some of those reflexes, we can compare the trot reflexes to nasal vowel reflexes. In Polish, generally speaking, short trot gives us O, long gives us an U, as in król, and with nasals we have the same type of system of differential reflexes in short and long position. So in accentual paradigm A, we get short roots coming down in Polish, krowa and mięta, in other words, o and n. In paradigm B, where we had end stress, we get long reflexes, u and on, as in król, króla, and kont. And in accentual paradigm C, just as we get in Polish accentual paradigm A, we also get short reflexes. So głowa, not u, but o, głowa, głowę, proch, but then also the short nasal, n, ręka, sęp, mięso. Notice that when we have a paradigm B original short, it never changes to an U, especially where there's no compensator lengthening in an open position. So, for example, on the one hand, we get król, króla, but with original shorts, we never get that U. Osa, koza, żona, kot, and so on and so forth. So that all means that the Polish trot groups need some better explanation than generalization of shortness. We need a better explanation to show why we get the long vowel reflexes. And that essentially is the problem. The problem can also be summarized by saying that on the one hand, we would like to explain Rozwadowski's evidence, stating that there was a type of pleophony, such as the yer vowel reflex to the left of the liquid in veproch, and at the same time we have the long vowel reflex in król. So the essential problem is, how do we explain the Rozwadowski sequences and also the long vowel reflex of król at the same time? We don't want to abandon either one of those types of evidence, but we need a single explanation. Well, linguists have long searched for the answer. Other than Jakobson, many linguists dealt with this problem. Another example is the Polish linguist Stibed, who wrote about this in several papers. In 1962, he struggled for an explanation and eventually came up with the idea that maybe there's an ancient special neo-acute tone in the proto-form that gave us król. That's not exactly satisfying, because neo-acute was very, very likely not a third tone, but just another rising that arose in end-stress paradigms of Polish, and not a special tone the way Stibed was explaining it at the time. Later, in 1969, Stibed gave some examples of the Polish trot groups, but he carefully picked them all from paradigms A and C, namely the examples vrona, broda, strona, which avoid the counterexamples of accentual paradigm B, that is to say, such examples as król, króla, płótno, włókno, which would go against the theory that was available, basically Rozwadowski's theory. So linguists were kind of in a quandary. And the breakthrough to understanding this much better can be said to have occurred in 1973. Henning Andersen, in a very brief summary of a conference paper, gave an explanation as to how this might have happened. And he stated that it was not due to lengthening or shortening per se, but to a different relative chronology of changing the quality of all short common Slavic vowels. Now, you have to assume that originally Common Slavic of this period did not have the vowel O, but only had a long and short ah, and that at one point the short ah changed to an O, but the long ah remained as ah. In this way, the southern South Slavic, that is in Czech and Slovak, tort metathesis had to have occurred before the short ah to O change, but in the north, that is to say, Lekhitic, including Polish and East Slavic, the tort metathesis occurred only after the rise of the new O vowel. So we get a chronology, according to Andersen's theory, stating that in the south, first we change tort to trot, and only later does the short ah go to an O. But in Lekhitic and Sorbian in particular, the ah first went to a short O, and then when we had a tort sequence instead of a tort sequence, we got our compensation for the loss of Moraic R, and the vowel changed to something new that never had existed before, a long O in this particular sequence. And that was the door that first opened to allow a long O into the system, and that is the possibility of an explanation for how we wound up with long vowel reflexes in the form król, króla. The only problem was that Andersen's scheme still left the problem of how we can explain the Rozvadovsky's data. How did we wind up with some examples like turot with a T yer vowel, R, O, and T, a kind of pleophony, at the same time that other examples gave us król, króla? Well, in 1985, an attempt was made by Timberlake to explain how both of those things were possible. And Timberlake proposed that an unusual scheme, that perhaps you had both of those things at the same time. Now, of course, you couldn't have a long vowel O together with Rozvadovsky's extra vowel, because then you would have had three more a sequence, and everyone agrees that Slavic just did not have three more sequences. It doesn't fit in with the general sound pattern, and no one has really assumed that. But what Timberlake did assume was that your total Moraic length in the tort groups of Polish that became trot were always equal to two mores, but fractionally. So, for example, you could start out with a half mora in the first syllable and have a 1.5 or 1.5 mora sequence in the second one, and so that way you would get, originally you would get the Rozvadovsky construct satisfied by having a half mora plus a 1.5, and then little by little the half mora would cede Moraic length to the second one, and you'd wind up going from 0.5 and 1.5 to 0 and 2. Now, he called this a non-discrete model, which meant that liquid metathesis and prosodic shortening were simultaneous events. My own opinion is that such fractional precision is an illusion, and a real historical sequence can be proposed. So the real question is why there is no evidence for this fractional model in the South. We never got anything like that in South Slavic. Why only Lekhitic and Sorbian gave us the evidence of such a fractional model, or something split between Rozvadovsky's explanation and the long vowel treatment of król? I would suggest that the real issue is whether each zone evaluated a long a sequence or o sequence as a single long segment or a sequence of two short vowels. For Sorbian and Polish, the crucial issue was integrating the new long mid-vowels that never existed before. long that arose in the also the tret groups, and long O that arose in the trot groups. Now, this was not an issue in the South, because in the South you only formed groups such as two short A's with two A moras, and that could easily be identified with a vowel that existed already, that is to say, the long A. However, in the pre-Polish dialects, early Polish, you would have had two short O's, two O moras, and that was a new vowel that didn't really exist as such in the long vowel system. So the system was a little unsure about whether to assimilate that as a two-mora sequence, a two-syllable sequence, or a single segment of one long vowel. So if we look at what happened in the southern zone to start with, we see it was relatively simple. In the form tart, we have a two-mora sequence, and it's identified immediately as T long A RT, and it just enters the system as a long A. Now, in this, if we get a sequence of two short O's, the situation is very different, in my opinion. Now, the classic sequence of a sequence of two O's occurred in East Slavic. And while we're working on this for Polish and West Slavic, we can mention that this also gives a convenient explanation of how the so-called polnoglossia or pleophony occurred in East Slavic. Because East Slavic is well known for not developing quantity or losing vocalic quantity. So we can let's assume that we had the compensation to the left of the with the loss of the Moraic R, two short O's, and then the R needs to metathesize. But it doesn't methathesize all the way to the left to the beginning of the two-mora sequence, because it sees the two short O's as two syllables. So you wind up with tort because of this. Now, in Lekhitic, it was more complicated than East Slavic, because Lekhitic was basically a quantitative system with vowel quantity. And they were just in the process of absorbing the new two-mora sequence of two O's and treating it as a long unit. But not all dialects had really completed this process. So my explanation would be that some zones may have seen the two O's as separate syllables, as happened in East Slavic, if they didn't integrate the long O into the system yet, and they would have wound up with the Rozvodovsky type of reflex. Other zones may have succeeded in integrating the long O into the system, and in that case, the R would have retracted or metathesized all the way to the left, giving trot with a long vowel. So that is really the explanation that I would give for this. In other words, tort with compensation, giving T two short O moras and then R, but those two short O moras have a double type of interpretation in Polish dialects, accounting for the two types of evidence. So in conclusion, we can say that the vowel of Polish trot must be considered as long in order to generate the correct modern reflexes. Jakobson assumed both leftward or rightward compensation for the liquid mora without a clear motivation for the direction, leftward or rightward. I assume leftward liquid compensation for Common Slavic, with all of the subsequent differences traceable to the relative chronology of A going to O, or the one or two segmental property of the vowel which precede the liquid at the moment of metathesis. Now, one thing that would have helped Polish integrate that vowel was the shortening in paradigm A, because that would have produced a short A that would have given the opposition short A, long A, in other words, the identical vowel quality with the long and short, that would have then helped the long O be integrated into the system. So for that reason, I feel that once the short accentual paradigm, the shortening took place, that is, of such words as rak became short in Polish, it opened the way for the long O to be integrated as a single segment. And that is probably the borderline historically between the Rozwadowski sequence and the later sequence of król, króla. Thank you for your attention.